everyone, it's Dr. Tidman. Thank you for stopping by my channel for another research review. This channel is really focused on health and wellness and the powerful role of ketones in supporting brain health, improving metabolic health, and managing chronic disease. Hopefully, this research review will be helpful and educational, and if it is, drop a comment below. Let me know. Today I'll be reviewing an article by Nick Norwitz et al. If any of you know Nick, he has a wonderful YouTube channel. He's a brilliant young man, brilliant researcher, PhD, MD. So he has a lot to say about ketones and neurology and neurodegeneration. So he's just one of my favorite people to listen to. In his article that I'll be reviewing, it gets quite technical, so I'm going to try to make it a little easier to understand some of it. But I always put the original article in the description. So if you'd like to go read Nick's article for yourself, please feel free to do so. So I'm going to go through kind of the topic that he investigated, some of the details of the article, review the results that he found, his conclusions and that of his co-authors. And then, of course, I always try to connect it to some tips and takeaways for you to use during your everyday life. That'll sound pretty familiar if you've watched other of my research reviews. So, what is mitochondrial dysfunction? We hear so much about mitochondria these days. Early evidence is pointing to the fact that brain glucose metabolism sometimes becomes problematic way before you develop symptoms of neurodegeneration. Mitochondria, the little what we call powerhouses of the cells who have many functions. Energy is one function, but they have many functions, can become dysfunctional in the brain, which causes a number of issues. One, the brain isn't able to handle glucose as well. It also can be connected to the formation of those amyloid plaques that we often see in Parkinsons and Alzheimer's. You also see them in multiple sclerosis. So these neurodegenerative diseases have something in common in that the mitochondria begin to just malfunction. It's really unknown in research whether the plaques and tau pathologies occur first and then you get the dysfunction, or whether the amyloid plaques and tau tangles are a result of mitochondrial dysfunction and inflammation. So their research is still debating what happens first, what comes first. We know that Parkinson's is associated with dysfunction in the mitochondria. And we also know that if you have a genetic predisposition, which is really less than 5% of the cases that are diagnosed, that you can really influence the expression of abnormal genes through this mitochondrial dysfunction. We also know that mitochondria play a role in the process of autophagy. We're not really clear on what that role is, but we know that in Parkinson's, the brain is not really cleaning up the dead cells, the dead neurons very well. It's really allowing kind of an aggregation or collection of dysfunctional neurons. So the question that Nick and his co-authors investigated was, Does beta hydroxybutyrate, which is blood ketones, improve mitochondrial function in Alzheimer's and Parkinson's? We do know through other research that ketones increases mitochondrial ATP production, and ATP is really essential for these neurons to have energy produced. We know that the presence of ketones will decrease reactive oxygen species, which is inflammatory molecules, and that the presence of ketones affects gene expression. It encourages the positive genes and it shuts down the negative genes. That's very simplistic, simplified, but we know it has effect on gene expression. Beta hydroxybutyrate levels in mice that have been altered to produce Parkinson's has a protective effect in these mice. They really find that the neurodegeneration slows, or even in some cases is arrested in mice that have high levels of blood ketones. And of course, again, its effect on inflammation is widely studied. So, inflammation, wow, it's really at the root of a lot of things. For those of you viewing who may have some arthritis, you know what inflammation is. If those joints get inflamed, they become painful and irritated. Well, the brain is exquisitely sensitive to inflammation. It doesn't tolerate it at all. So, when you have sustained neural inflammation in the brain, it really does affect the mitochondrial function, the function of the neurons, the function of what we call the supporting cells, the astrocytes, and it really chronically releases low grades of inflammatory cytokines. Some of you may have heard the term inflammatory cytokines or cytokine storm during the COVID pandemic, because COVID really produced a storm of inflammatory cytokines that affected the whole body. Well, similarly, when the brain is experiencing low-grade inflammation over a long period of time, these cells can start secreting inflammatory cytokines. We know that this causes damage in the way that the neurons are signaling. Neurons and their microglia and astrocytes have to remain in balance to function. And if you've got those neurons surrounded by these inflammatory molecules, that's going to disrupt that balance. We know too that with this chronic low-grade inflammation, the cells that produce the dopamine, which is the problem in Parkinson's, can be decreased or even die. And so inflammation is a big deal in the brain. And we know that ketones can affect levels of inflammation in the brain. So what about glucose and insulin? What roles do they play? Well, some of you may have heard that Alzheimer's is now classified as type 3 diabetes. And why is that? Because they're finding a strong connection between impaired glucose metabolism, we call it cerebral glucose metabolism, and symptoms in Alzheimer's. We also know that neurons, brain cells, love ketones. Ketones are like what I call jet fuel for the brain. And in the absence of available glucose, or when glucose is impaired in the brain, if ketones are present, the cells will grab the ketones. So ketogenesis specifically fuels brain cells in the times of impaired glucose metabolism. What happens with the body and the brain when your glucose is chronically elevated due to your nutrition and other factors? The body becomes insulin resistant. The insulin cranks out at a high level. The cells become rather deaf to the functions of insulin. They get resistant to insulin, which means, insulin's beneficial effects can't work either because insulin's responsible for getting glucose into the cells. So you have to have some of it. The problem is the brain also becomes insulin resistant. So brain insulin resistance causes a crisis of energy for the brain neurons. You also see this in Alzheimer's, mild cognitive impairment, and in some of the cognitive differences and difficulties we see in Parkinson's. So what are ketotherapeutics? There are different ways that you can build ketones in your bloodstream. You've heard me talk about this before. One way is endogenous, that is within the body creates ketones, what your body makes. And how does your body do that? By consuming a high-fat, low-carb diet. Your body will actually burn its own fat for fuel and make its own ketones. We call those endogenous, in the body. Another way you can do that actually is with your fasting regimen. As you fast, your body begins to create its own ketones using the fat storage in your body. The second way, of course, that we've talked about a lot on my channel is exogenous. XO means outside of. So this is the ketones you take in, you consume. The most natural way to do that is by some of these healthy fats, including MCT or coconut oil. You can also have some ketone benefit from olive oil. But the MCT and coconut oil are pretty powerful in helping your blood ketone levels to rise. Now, there are lots of companies out there that are selling exogenous ketone supplements, and you can also use those to raise and elevate your ketones quite a bit. They can be pretty pricey, but if you're dealing with a severe neurodegenerative disease, or certainly if you have something like epilepsy, you may need to use an exogenous ketone supplement to get your ketones up to high enough levels to control those seizures. So the interventions I've just mentioned also affect those mitochondrial functions that we've talked about. Of course, intermittent fasting is powerful on a lot of levels, and you can actually begin to switch your brain from glucose burning to more of a ketone burning system. Nutritional ketosis, which is quite different than ketoacidosis. This is something that you may hear from your doctors who aren't very up on the definitions. When you talk about nutritional ketosis, you're getting your blood levels above 0.5 millimolar. Ketoacidosis is something that diabetics, especially type 1 diabetics, experience, where their ketone levels are above 10 or above 15. So this is not that. Nutritional ketosis is actually a very natural thing our bodies have always done in times of fasting. As your ketone levels rise, your blood glucose levels will go down. They will decrease. There's an inverse relationship there. Building those ketones, again, high fat, low carb diets can do that. Intermittent fasting can do that. Exogenous ketones can do that. We know that the ketones affect that neural junction. It's where the synapses, where all those chemical and electrical impulses take place in those neurons. It can affect clear down to that cellular level. Very powerful. You wouldn't think it would be, but it really makes a huge difference in neuronal connectivity, we call it. You get those electrical impulses and those chemical impulses processing much more efficiently. So, ketosis can be achieved by the high fat, low carb diet, taking those carbs down below 20 grams. You've heard me mention this before. Ketosis has positive effects on mitochondrial function in those neurons in the brain, especially the ones you want to preserve, the dopamine producing neurons that you want to preserve. The brain actually prefers ketones for fuel. It's like eating a steak versus eating bologna. The brain really loves those ketones. Ketones in the bloodstream can help mitigate. That means it can help normalize some of the effects of inflammation in the brain. Ketones can help with cerebral insulin resistance. As your brain begins to process ketones, because it lacks the ability to process glucose. Also, ketones can help the brain clean up dead or damaged cells. This is called autophagy. We've seen a lot of ketone research in cancer with the increase in autophagy, cleaning up cancer cells. And then we know that the mouse models in Parkinson's really show that ketones will actually slow the progression of the disease. On my YouTube channel, I posted a video that reviewed a mouse model in Parkinson's. Check it out. And as you would guess, these are my tips and takeaways. You've heard them before. I've already been over some of them. But again, I think you need to test your glucose and ketones every day. You don't know what your body is doing with ketones unless you test it. And so obtain a glucose ketone meter. Keto Mojo is a good one. Increase your daily intake of those healthy fats. MCT oil, coconut oil, butter, lard, olive oil, all the things that our body knows what to do with. Omit out of your diet processed foods, sugary juices, sodas, grains. None of these things were our bodies created to be able to handle. Do exercise. Exercise also improves glucose levels. It reduces insulin resistance. Your muscles can really help with glucose regulation in your bloodstream. Add that daily MCT oil and start an intermittent fasting regimen. Take your meals down to 2 meals a day with a 16-hour overnight fast. And occasionally, depending upon your health goals, do a 20 to 23-hour fast with 1 meal. You'll really raise your ketones quite a bit. This is the reference for the Norwitz et al. Study. Fascinating research that they did. And they really highlighted several neurodegenerative diseases, not just Parkinson's, in their article. I'll post the article in the description. Thanks again for stopping by another research review. I really appreciate you all. Be sure to subscribe and hit notifications so you'll know when my next video is being posted. Take care, everyone.